We naturally tend to think of Katrina as a pure natural disaster, right? Like some unstoppable act of God. But the absolutely crucial point we're going to uncover today is that this was actually a decades-long infrastructure failure. It was basically just waiting for a spark. It wasn't the weather that ultimately doomed the city, it was what was built underneath it.
Section 1. A monster in the Gulf. Tracing the birth of an unstoppable force.
Let's trace how this happened. Over just a few days, Katrina underwent some seriously staggering intensification. So after a brief period of weakening over Florida, the storm hit the Gulf of Mexico, where it encountered unusually warm 30 degrees Celsius waters. And in weather terms, that temperature is essentially high-octane fuel. With almost literally nothing holding it back, the storm rapidly expelled heat and just exploded into an absolute monster by the morning of August 28th.
The sheer scale of this threat was completely unprecedented. We're talking about the first Category 5 hurricane to form in the Gulf in 25 years. It packed maximum sustained winds of 175 miles per hour, and its central pressure dropped to a historic 902 millibars. That made it one of the most intense Atlantic hurricanes ever recorded.
Section 2. The disaster foretold. A vulnerable city and the ignored warnings.
So physically speaking, New Orleans is incredibly vulnerable. It's essentially sitting right in a bowl, wedged between Lake Pontchartrain and the Mississippi River, with some neighborhoods up to 10 feet below sea level. The only reason the city even exists in its current form is because of an enormous system of interlocking levees, flood walls, and canals. If you take that system away, the city doesn't just flood, it sinks.
And here's the thing. The government actually knew this. In fact, just 1 year prior to Katrina, in 2004, FEMA funded a massive simulation called Hurricane Pam. This modeled the exact scenario, a direct hit from a slow-moving Category 3 storm. This simulation predicted tens of thousands of deaths and a completely submerged city. We're talking about a humanitarian catastrophe on a scale the U.S. had never seen.
Which brings us to a really haunting reality. When researchers presented these terrifying findings to federal officials, the room didn't take it seriously. One scientist even recalled that folks in the back room were just laughing. It made him feel like just some geek with a strange accent. The warnings were literally right there on the table. The problem wasn't a lack of information, it was a total lack of action.
So, by the time Mayor Ray Nagin issued the first mandatory evacuation in the city's history on the morning of August 28th, the National Hurricane Center was already sounding the alarm that human suffering would be incredible. But for hundreds of thousands of people, an order to leave doesn't equal the actual ability to leave. If you didn't have a car, if you were elderly, or if you were ill, it was already too late.
Section 3. When the levees broke. The rapid cascade of infrastructure failure.
Let's move to the morning of August 29th. At 6:10 a.m., Katrina makes landfall as a strong Category 3 hurricane, bringing 125-mile-per-hour winds. Initially, because the eye passed slightly east, federal officials actually thought the city had dodged the worst of it. The wind damage was serious, for sure, but it was survivable. There was this brief sense of cautious relief. But that hope was incredibly tragic, because the true disaster, the massive storm surge pushed ahead by the storm's peak intensity, had already been set in motion.
The collapse unfolded with terrifying speed. Even before dawn, the surge began overtopping the levees. Around 5 a.m., a 30-foot section of the Industrial Canal, which was a waterway experts had long warned would act as a deadly funnel, completely breached. And over the next 24 hours, there would be more than 50 reported failures in the levee and floodwall system, sending unstoppable walls of water right into residential neighborhoods. The absolute crucial point to understand here is that the water didn't just rise slowly. It surged violently into homes with zero warning. People who tried to ride out the storm found the water rising from their waists to their chests in a matter of seconds. Those who could scrambled up into their attics, and later on, rescuers would find these haunting axe marks on the ceilings of flooded homes, the frantic marks of people literally hacking their way onto their own roofs just to escape the rising water. The lower Ninth Ward was profoundly devastated.
Section 4. A city left behind. The human toll and an inadequate response.
As the infrastructure failed, geography played a really cruel role in who was spared. The older, historic parts of the city, like the famous French Quarter and the Garden District, were actually built above sea level, so they were largely spared from the flooding. But the sprawling residential neighborhoods surrounding them, areas like Lakeview, Gentilly, and St. Bernard Parish, they weren't just flooded, they were completely submerged, literally turned into lakes.
For the tens of thousands who couldn't evacuate, the nightmare was just beginning. Roughly 15,000 people sought refuge at the Superdome, and it quickly devolved into a humanitarian crisis broadcast on live television. The roof partially tore open, food and water ran out, plumbing completely failed, and people were left sweltering in 95-degree heat. Outside, citizens were stranded on elevated highway overpasses for days, just waiting for a painfully slow, uncoordinated response from FEMA, the exact same agency whose own simulations had predicted this.
Section 5. The cost of inaction. Counting the irreplaceable losses.
Let's look at the hard data. By August 31st, just 2 days after landfall, an unbelievable 80% of the entire city of New Orleans was underwater. In some areas, the city was submerged under 15 feet of water. Just try to picture that for a second. The official death toll stands at approximately 1,400 people. And what you really need to take away from this is that the storm didn't kill randomly. Almost half of all the victims were over the age of 74. It disproportionately killed the elderly, the sick, and the people with the absolutely fewest options to escape.
The city itself was fundamentally hollowed out. Before the storm, the population was nearly 485,000. By July of the following year, it had plummeted to roughly 230,000. More than half the city's population was just gone, alongside over 134,000 damaged housing units.
Financially speaking, the cost reached an estimated $125 billion. That firmly cemented Katrina as one of the costliest natural disasters in all of American history.
Which brings us to the ultimate, heartbreaking admission. In June 2006, the Army Corps of Engineers officially admitted that faulty design and substandard construction of the levees contributed to the disaster. Later analysis by the American Society of Civil Engineers concluded that 2/3 of the flooding was entirely avoidable if the levees had just held up. Katrina's name was permanently retired by the World Meteorological Organization, but the real takeaway here, the deadliest aspect of Katrina wasn't the weather. It was a preventable failure of infrastructure.
After all this, the federal government eventually spent over $14.3 billion constructing a substantially more robust system of floodgates, pumps, and surge barriers. But as we look back on the ignored simulations, the laughed-at scientists, and a city that was allowed to drown, we're left with a serious, lingering question. As the Gulf waters continue to warm and hurricane season returns year after year, when the next monster storm inevitably arrives, will this finally be enough?